The door came off its hinges before the man inside could rise from his chair. Lamp flame bent sideways the displaced air, and in the empty frame stood something that should not have been able to stand there at all. Rewind 9 days. A woman climbed the hill to the manor gate, gave her name, was turned away. 9 days later, they pulled her from the river below the mill. The case was closed so quickly, it never had time to become a question. But someone kept the question anyway. 2 in the morning. A sound so small it barely existed. The kind of crying trained down to nothing. Because sound carries, and attention is not always safe. Long-sleeve button to the wrist in the July heat, in a house warm enough that no one else wore them. A scar beneath that fabric shaped like a single letter. And in the market this morning, a man stood while the crowd parted around him like water around a stone. Because burned into his forehead was a name, written in something no water would ever wash away. Who put it there? Lord Aldric Vane had been alive for 320 years, which meant he had outlasted empires. Outlasted plagues. Outlasted the particular kind of human certainty that insists the world will stay the way it is. He had watched mountains get smaller, not because the mountains changed, but because men kept finding bigger things to measure them against. And yet, here he was. 7:30 in the morning. Working through a property dispute about a fence line that had been mysteriously migrating in one man's favor for the better part of a decade, 320 years old. Still dealing with fence disputes. He made a note in the margin. His handwriting was neat, precise. The kind of handwriting that said, "I have had a very long time to practice this, and I intend to show it." His coffee sat at the edge of the desk. It had been hot at some point. That point had passed. He kept meaning to drink it and kept not doing it, which was a pattern he had developed sometime in the 17th century, and apparently had no intention of breaking. Outside, rain hit the old stone of Vane Manor, the way rain hit old stone, like it had a grievance. Like it had been building to this particular argument for weeks, and the building was going to hear it out whether it wanted to or not. Vane Manor had stood for 6 centuries. It had opinions about rain. None of them concerned. A knock at the study door. Sutton. He came in the way he always did. Moving with the specific economy of a man who had decided at some point that unnecessary motion was a form of dishonesty. He stood just inside the doorway, hands clasped behind his back. Expression entirely neutral, which on Sutton meant absolutely nothing, because Sutton's expression was always entirely neutral. He had been Aldric's head of security for over a century. In that time, Aldric had learned to read the spaces between what Sutton said and what Sutton meant. Right now the space was saying, "There is something else." "Minor incident in the kitchen," Sutton said. One of the newer staff. A disagreement about protocol. Aldric didn't look up. "Handle it." "Already handled. Then why are you telling me?" A pause. Not a long one. Force of habit. Aldric looked up. Sutton looked back. Neither of them moved. "What is it?" Aldric asked. Sutton looked at his hands briefly. "Back up. Nothing urgent. I'll have the morning report ready by 9. He left Aldric watch the door close. Then looked at the fence dispute. Then looked at his cold coffee. He picked it up, drank it. All of it. Because apparently that was what his morning required. A deliberate act of terrible coffee, before he could feel like a person capable of facing the rest of the day. He had been doing this for 320 years. Some days that felt like wisdom. Some days it felt like a very long argument that hadn't ended yet. Today, listening to the rain work out, its feelings against his windows, and reading about the fence that moved when nobody was watching, it felt like the latter. He went back to the dispute. He handled it. Then he handled 17 other things, because that was what 300 years of accumulated responsibility looked like up close. 17 things before lunch, and the awareness that 17 more were waiting. The afternoon came in quieter than the morning. The rain had decided its point was made. The light through the tall study windows went from gray to gold to something almost amber. He needed a specific volume, on property law from the library, not exciting, but necessary. He went to get it. He almost didn't notice her. She was on the tall ladder at the far end of the library, dusting the upper shelves with the methodical attention of someone who understood that careless haste at height was a choice with consequences. Dark hair pulled back, long sleeves despite the July warmth that had finally found its way into the upper floors of the manor. He had almost turned and left. He had done it before, passed through the library while someone was working, collected what he needed, exchanged a nod at most. The household ran on mutual understanding. He didn't interrupt their work. They didn't interrupt his, but then he saw the book. It was sitting on the small table by the window, a volume of 17th century correspondence, dry, administrative, the kind of thing that interested exactly 3 people in the world at any given time, and he was one of them. He had been working through it for a week. He had left it open to page 312, face down, which he knew was bad for the spine and did anyway, because the alternative was losing his place. The book was now closed, properly closed, spine up, facing out, positioned at the precise angle where the late afternoon light would hit the title without requiring you to pick it up. A small strip of paper, torn carefully. One clean edge marked the page, page 312. He stood there, poxed, and looked at it for a moment, then looked at the woman on the ladder who had not turned around, who did not know she was being observed, who was simply returning order to the upper shelves with the focus of someone for whom the work was the work, and that was sufficient reason for it. She had looked at the open book and thought, that's not how you treat a book, and she had closed it carefully and marked the page, because the person who left it there would want to find it again. That was all. A small thing. An ordinary act of consideration. Except he had not had anyone consider his books in a very long time. Not like that. Not the quiet, unrequest kind. The kind that didn't expect acknowledgement. He stood there for a moment, longer than was probably necessary, then left without the property law volume, which was the one thing he had come in for. He stood outside the library door for a full 3 seconds before registering this fact, turned around, went back in, got the book, kept his eyes on the shelves, not the ladder, kept them on the shelves, mostly. That evening he found Sutton before dinner. He kept it professional, the tone of a responsible employer making a routine inquiry. That was the tone he was going for, and he was committed to it. The woman in the library this afternoon, he said, dark hair, young. The tall ladder. Sutton looked at him with an expression of absolute neutrality that was somehow also distinctly knowing. Wren, he said, 6 months with us. Good record. No concerns from the senior staff. Age? 23. Where is she from? Village called Halstead, about 12 miles east. A brief pause. Both parents deceased. Father about 2 years ago. Mother before that. That's all. It was not all. And Sutton knew it was not all. And Aldric was aware that Sutton knew. The thing that was not all was this. She wore long sleeves in July. In a house that, despite centuries of architectural decisions clearly made by people who thought aesthetic gravitas was worth being cold, was actually quite warm in summer. The rest of the household staff had adapted weeks ago. Light fabric, short sleeves, the ordinary common sense of people who sweat in heat and prefer not to. Wren wore long sleeves, always, down to her wrists. Even on the days when the upper floors of the manor felt like the incense held too tight for too long. It was possible she was simply cold-natured. It was possible it was personal preference. It was also possible it was neither of those things. He went to bed without finishing the fence report, which never happened. He lay in the dark and did not sleep, which was not unusual. 3 centuries of insomnia left you with very specific and highly inconvenient reading habits, and thought about page 312, and the strip of paper, and the particular quality of attention required to close someone else's book at exactly the right place without being asked, and about long sleeves in July. He did not like what he was thinking. But he had learned. across a very long time, that the thoughts you did not like were often the ones most worth following. The night that changed everything began with a sound, not dramatic. Not the kind of sound that announces itself in stories. Just small, barely there, the kind you had to stop moving to catch it all. 2 in the morning. Aldric walking the west corridor on his way back from the grounds. He still walked the perimeter at night sometimes. Old habit, from decades when it meant something tactical. Before it became simply the thing he did when the inside of his own head got too loud. The manor was quiet, that particular 2 in the morning quiet that was less the absence of sound and more the presence of stillness. The building settling into itself, the specific breathing of a very old house. He passed the east corridor and heard it crying not loud, precisely the opposite. This was crying that had been trained down to almost nothing, the kind you learned to do when you understood that sound carried and attention was not always safe. Through a thick old door, barely audible even to his hearing, he stopped, stood in the dark hallway. He could keep walking. He had no standing, technically, to knock on a household employee's door at 2 in the morning because he'd heard her crying. That wasn't his role. That wasn't appropriate. He stood there for what was probably too long, then walked on, but slowly. And the next morning, before he'd had his terrible coffee, he found Sutton. "I need you to look into something," he said. "The fence situation in the north." Not the fence, he paused. Wren, the woman in the library. I need a full picture, not just the employment record. Where she came from, who she knows. Who she was connected to in Halstead before she came here. He set down his cup. Anything that explains why a 23-year-old woman is crying alone at 2 in the morning and wearing long sleeves in July. Sutton was still for a moment. "I'll have it for you this afternoon," he said. He left. Aldric looked at his breakfast. The eggs were already going cold. He seemed to have a gift for letting things go cold. He ate them anyway. Sutton came back at 3. He sat down across from the desk, which he almost never did, which itself was information, and set a thin folder across the surface between them. "Before you read it," he said, "I've verified the key points through 3 separate sources." Aldric opened the folder, the name at the top. Cole Harwick, 28, Halstead Village. Mill worker. The pages didn't need to be long. They weren't. The pattern was visible in a few lines of dates and names, and the specific administrative silence of things that should have been recorded and weren't. 3 formal complaints against Cole Harwick over 4 years. 3 complaints withdrawn, each one preceded by a brief period where the woman involved was reportedly unreachable, followed by a period where she reportedly seemed fine. Aldric had been alive long enough to read that pattern without having to think about it. He kept reading. Near the bottom of the second page was a paragraph in Sutton's own handwriting. At that afternoon, the ink was still fresh. It described what Sutton had found when he began pulling threads backward. Not just Cole Harwick as an individual, but Cole Harwick's family, his father. His father's history. 3 years ago, when Wren was 19 and her father was still alive, a man had come to their house, made a formal inquiry about a potential arrangement, an old-fashioned phrase for a very old-fashioned proposition Wren's father had refused, sent the man away. The man was Cole Harwick's father. Aldric read that paragraph twice, set the folder down. He didn't change, Aldric said. No. There was never a period where he was kind, and then became something else. He identified her. He waited. He came back when her father was gone. Yes. How long after the father died? 4 months. 4 months. Just long enough for a 22-year-old woman with a 15-year-old sister to understand, in the specific way that financial precarity teaches you. That alone was not a safe condition. Aldric looked out the window. The valley below was doing that thing it did in July late afternoons, turning gold in a way that made it look like something worth protecting. "Set up a meeting," he said. "I'll talk to her." Where? He thought about the library, the ladder, page 312. The strip of torn paper in the library, he said. Tomorrow afternoon. She didn't know why she'd been summoned. That was clear from the way she stood in the library doorway. The careful posture of someone who had decided in advance to give nothing away. Hands clasped, expression contained. Eyes doing the work of watching everything at once while appearing to watch nothing. 23 years old, she looked older. Not in the face, exactly. In the quality of her attention. The way certain people carry years in how they hold themselves, rather than in any feature you could point to. Aldric was standing at the window, not the desk. He had made that choice deliberately, less formal, less the shape of an interrogation. Sit down, he said. She looked at the two reading chairs angled toward each other. She sat. On the edge, the posture of someone keeping options open. He sat in the other chair. No preamble. He had lived long enough to know that for certain people, the preamble was harder than the thing itself. He looked at her and said, "Tell me why you were crying at 2 in the morning." She went still in a very specific way. "I wasn't. You were. A beat." "Nightmares," she said. "I have them sometimes. I apologize if the sound." "What are the nightmares about?" She looked at him. Really looked. Not the careful professional eye contact of someone managing decorum. Actual looking. Measuring something. Making a decision. Then, in a voice that had gone quieter than the one she'd come in with. Not having a way out. The room was still. Rain again, soft this time. More suggestion than event. He didn't speak. He had learned that silence was sometimes the most useful thing you could give someone who was about to tell you the truth. She didn't start with Cole Harwick. She started with her father, which made sense. Because it started there, not with the moment Cole appeared, but with the moment the person who would have prevented him from appearing was no longer present. Her father had been a practical man, not wealthy, not connected, but the kind of man who understood people quickly and trusted that understanding. He had seen Cole Harwick for 30 seconds at a village, gathering 3 years prior and made his assessment. He had died 14 months after that. In his sleep, peacefully by every external measure. Which didn't prevent it from being devastating for the two people who were left. Cole appeared 4 months after the funeral. She told this part without emotion, like a woman who had reviewed the sequence so many times that she'd removed the shock from it and was left with just the progression. Point A, point B, point C. "At first I thought my father had been wrong about him," she said. "He was decent. He helped with the house. He was patient with Petra." A pause. "I thought my father hadn't known him well enough. But my father was right. Flat. Not bitter. Just the tone of someone recording an accurate fact. He was right from the beginning. I simply needed more time to understand it." "When did the violence start?" She looked at her hands. Long sleeves. Down to her wrists. "There wasn't a clean start," she said. "That's what's hard to explain to someone who hasn't been in it. It doesn't arrive with a door slamming. It comes in degrees. A grip that's slightly too hard. A comment that's almost a joke, but not quite. By the time you can point to something specific and say, that's what it is, you're already inside it. You've already adjusted." Aldric said nothing. He had seen this pattern before, across a very long life, in various iterations. He recognized it with the particular clarity of someone who had been looking away for too long, and was now seeing clearly. "Petra," he said. She nodded. Within the first month he had identified her as the reason I wouldn't leave. Sometimes it was just a mention. A reminder that he knew her schedule, her friends. The route she walked home from school, you tried to leave twice, what happened? The first time, he found me in 3 days. I was at a friend's home in the next village. He came and he was very calm, a small pause, which was worse than if he'd been angry. Another breath. The second time I didn't make it out of Halstead. He had people watching the roads. The word people landed in a specific way, because people meant network, meant planning, meant a man who had thought ahead about the possibility of resistance and had arranged accordingly. How many? 4 that I know of. Men he's known since childhood. They do what he asks. They have done for years. Did you file a complaint with the magistrate? Something in her expression shifted. Other women did, she said. Before me, he waited. 3 of them. Formal complaints. She said the word formal, the way you say a word that used to mean something and has since been revised. Nothing happened to him. Things happened to them. She didn't elaborate. There's someone else, he said. It wasn't a question. Someone you haven't said yet. A long pause. Nora Ashby, she said. He had seen the name already. It was in the section of Sutton's report with the handwritten annotations. The section compiled that afternoon, verified through 3 sources. He had read it 4 times before this meeting, but hearing it from her was different. She said it, the way you say the name of someone whose grief you're still deciding if you have permission to claim. She was older than me, Wren said. 30. She'd lived in Halstead her whole life. She knew the Harwicks going back decades. She knew things about Cole that I didn't know when I was still trying to convince myself my father had misjudged him. She knew about the complaints, the pattern, the cycle of filings and withdrawals. She had watched it happen with at least 2 women before Wren. And she had done what people do when official fail repeatedly. She had built something unofficial, small, careful, a place to stay for a night. A message passed, a door held open at exactly the right moment. She came to me about 3 months after things started getting bad, Wren said. She told me she knew a way, that she had helped others, that if I was ready. Why didn't you go? She looked at the window. The light was going now. Gold to something cooler. She said I would have to leave Petra behind for 1 week while she arranged the second part. Just 1 week, she stopped. Started again. I thought 1 week was too long. I thought anything could happen in 1 week. 6 months later, Nora was dead. The room held very still. They found her in the river, below the mill. The magistrate ruled it an accident, or possibly a fall, or possibly suicide, he said. Yes, the word in her mouth was not acceptance. It was the word you use for a conclusion you don't believe, but have been given no institutional support for rejecting. Nora wasn't. She wasn't the kind of person who stopped. She was always making plans. She had a list of women she was still trying to help. A pause. She wasn't finished. Aldric was quiet. He was thinking about the section of Sutton's report that he had not mentioned yet. The section he had read 4 times. The section sitting in his chest since that afternoon like something heavy placed on a surface not designed for it. The mark on your wrist, he said. The letter H. She went very still. Cole, she said, barely audible. How long ago? 3 months. He looked at her carefully. She was not going to offer more than that. He was not going to ask for more. What he had was sufficient to understand exactly the kind of man Cole Harwick was. The kind who carved ownership into skin, for whom possession was not a feeling, but a statement requiring permanent notation. He stood, walked to the window. The valley below was going dark. Village lights beginning to show, small, scattered. Sutton is going to arrange for your sister to come here tonight, he said. Tonight. We'll give her a reason that makes sense to her, visiting you, seeing the manor. She doesn't need to know anything else. He heard Wren stand behind him. She'll stay in the east wing. She'll be safe and comfortable. He turned back. Tomorrow you'll go about your day as normal. And tomorrow evening, when Cole expects to see you, you're going to follow me. I'm going to be there. She looked at him for a long moment, 23 years old. 2 years of being systematically reduced by a man who had identified her as a target before she was old enough to recognize the category, and still looking at him with eyes that were doing the honest, effortful work of deciding whether trust was something she could afford. Why, she asked. Why does this concern you? Because you're on my land, in my house, under my roof. He said it without performance, without the gravity of someone announcing a principle. Just the simple statement of a thing that was true, that's supposed to mean something. The fact that it hasn't, for too long, for too many people, that's a failure I intend to correct. He opened the desk drawer. took out a pendant on a fine chain. Silver-old, the Vane crest in miniature. He held it out. She looked at it. Then at him. "Wear it," he said. "Don't take it off. If he finds it." He paused. "Then everything happens faster. But it happens either way." She took it, turned it in her fingers. The chain caught the last of the evening light. "What will you do to him?" she asked. "What needs doing? Will you kill him?" "No," she looked up. "Death is easy," Aldric said. "What I have in mind is harder than that." Sutton found him at 9. Petra had arrived an hour before, wide-eyed, overwhelmed in the pleasant of someone on a scale they weren't expecting. Currently being settled into the East Wing by a member of staff, of brief to be warmly welcoming and entirely uninformative. "The sister is settled," Sutton said. "Good." A pause. "There's something else," Sutton said. "I left it out of the written report. I wanted to tell you directly." Aldrich turned from the window. Sutton had the expression of a man who has been carrying something uncomfortable all day and has decided the time has come. "Nora Ashby," he said, "before she died. She came here. The room changed quality 2 years ago, March. She came to the gate and was turned away. The gate log shows she was told you weren't receiving visitors." He paused. "The log entry is dated March 14th. She was found in the river on March 23rd. 9 days." Aldrich said nothing. "There's no record of what she wanted," Sutton continued. "But given what we know about her, who she was, what she was doing in Halstead, it seems she came to warn you, to ask for help. Or both. The fire had burned it low. The room was mostly desk lamp now. Warm amber shadows. Who turned her away? Fenwick. East Gate. How long has Fenwick been here? 7 years. And before?" A pause. "I'm still looking into that. Look harder. And tonight, leave Fenwick off the briefing for tomorrow." "He thinks tonight is ordinary." Sutton understood. He always understood. "Yes, my lord." After he left, Aldrich stood alone. 9 days Nora Ashby had stood at his gate, had given her name, had been sent away because the lord of the manor was not receiving visitors. He tried to reconstruct what he had been doing on March 14th, 2 years ago. The quarterly reports, the correspondence. Something about the Southfield drainage. Something entirely forgettable, which was precisely the point. He had been here, 200 meters from the gate, and she had been sent away. And 9 days later she was in the river. He placed his hand flat against the window glass. "Cold against his palm, I know," he said. "To the dark. To no one, or possibly to someone. I know you came here, and I'm sorry it took this long." The village lights held steady in the valley, indifferent to the apology, as they should be. He stood there until midnight, then walked quietly to the east wing. Stood in the corridor outside Petra's door long enough to hear the soft, certain sound of her sleeping save. One of them was safe. He went back to his study and sat with the weight of what he knew and what he hadn't known and what tomorrow was going to require of him. Outside, the July night was warm and still. Long sleeves weather for those who wore them. Not for much longer. The morning of the day everything changed. Looked from the outside, entirely ordinary. Which was, Aldrich had found across 3 centuries, how most important days looked from the outside. The world didn't adjust its presentation for significance. It just kept going and let you have the significance in whatever state you could manage it. He was at his desk before 7. Reports. Letters. The fence dispute had developed, a new complication involving a surveyor, with an inconsistent relationship with measurement. The normal operations of an estate that had been operating for 600 years and had opinions about disruption. Sutton came in at 8. Sat down, still significant, still telling, and laid out the evening's logistics. Cole Harwick's 4 regular associates. Names, locations, schedules, the specific texture of their Tuesday evenings when nothing unusual was expected. Sutton had 3 people positioned. The plan was to collect all 4, quietly before 10, before absences became noticeable, and bring them to the clearing by the old oak on the east edge of the Duskmere Woods. The oak that had stood for 500 years. And Fenwick? Aldrich asked, off the briefing entirely. He believes tonight is ordinary, good. A pause, my lord, Sutton said carefully. There's a possibility Harwick has been warned, not necessarily by Fenwick. He's a watchful man by nature. If anyone in the village noted unfamiliar faces in his vicinity over the past 2 days, then we adapt, and if he's prepared something? Aldrich looked at him steadily. Then we deal with it. Sutton nodded, stood, was at the door when Aldrich said, "She asked to speak with me this morning." Before the briefing, Sutton stopped. "Send her in when you go," Aldrich said, and closed the door. Wren came in quietly, which was how she moved through the world, with the contained economy of someone for whom taking up minimal space had become not just habit but instinct. She stood near the door, not quite at attention, not quite relaxed, but something had shifted in her since yesterday. Still the long sleeves, still the practiced stillness, but her eyes were different. Less the eyes of someone scanning for exits, more the eyes of someone who had made a decision in the night and was at peace with it, in the way you're at peace with necessary things. Not comfortably, but clearly. "I have information," she said. "Sit down. I'd rather stand. A beat." "If that's acceptable," he gestured. "Go ahead." She told him things that weren't in Sutton's report, because Sutton's information came from the outside, from observation, from sources, from the particular knowledge of someone looking at a situation through glass. Her information came from 2 years of being inside it. Cole drank from 8 o'clock. Not socially, purposefully, the way some people drink to stay at a specific temperature. A management strategy. By 10 he wasn't precisely drunk, but slower. The sharpness that defined his daytime hours developed a slight lag. He kept his father's knife on the table when he drank. He'd never used it on anyone. Not that she'd seen. But he put it on the table the way certain men put certain things on tables for the room to know they were there. And one more thing. He hates being observed when he loses control, she said. More than anything else. More than defiance. More than being challenged directly. If there are witnesses, he becomes unpredictable in a specific way. Not necessarily. More violent, more desperate. He does things even he seems to regret. Aldrich looked at her steadily. "You've spent 2 years building this. When you can't run," she said, "you learn the terrain." He was quiet for a moment. The morning light from the east windows caught the line of her jaw, the particular quality of exhausted precision that he had recognized, across centuries of watching people navigate situations that should not have existed. "He'll have the knife on the table," Aldrich said. "Yes, and may have more than 4 men. He knows something is different with me. He doesn't know what, but he's been edgy this week. Does that change your willingness to go?" She looked at him directly. "No." Something in him settled. "Good." A pause. "Before you go, Petra had breakfast in the East Wing sitting room this morning. Spent last night in the library and fell asleep in the reading chair. Someone put a blanket over her. Something moved in Wren's expression. Small and real. She's completely comfortable," Aldrich said. "Completely safe. And completely unaware that tonight is anything other than an extended visit." A pause. "I wanted you to know that before you left." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said, and left. Aldrich turned back to the desk, picked up his coffee. It was cold. Of course it was. He drank it anyway and went back to work, because work was what you did with the hours between decisions, and there were decisions coming that required everything to be in order first. The July evening came in the way July evenings came in duskmary, slowly, reluctantly, the light cycling through gold to amber, a bruised deep pink before finally conceding to the dark. The kind of light that made the valley look irreplaceable. The kind of light that made you think, this specific place, this particular version of it. Whether that was beautiful or terrible depended entirely on what you were about to do in it. Wren left at 8:30, through the east gate. Not the main entrance, too formal, too ceremonial for what this needed to be. The same road she had taken every time Cole had summoned her over the past 6 months. Same pace. Same careful blankness she arranged on her face when she was walking toward something she didn't want to be walking toward. Tonight, the Vane pendant was warm against her collarbone. Tonight, she was not entirely alone. Aldric went through the back of the grounds and into the tree line. West, then south, curving through the Duskmere woods toward Flopper where Cole Harwick's cottage sat at the edge of the village. He moved the way he moved when he wasn't managing what he was, with the fluid, unhurried precision of something that had spent 3 centuries, calibrating exactly how much force each situation required, and learning to hold it until the situation required it. He wasn't thinking about the cottage yet. He was thinking about these specific trees, this specific stretch of woods. He had walked here before many times, across many years. The woods changed slowly. Some things changed slowly enough to feel permanent. And somewhere in this particular stretch of woods, 9 days before she was found in the river, Nora Ashby had walked alone, towards something she knew was dangerous. With the tools she had, small networks, quiet arrangements, doors held open at precisely the right moment. Not enough. In the end, not enough. He walked faster. The cottage was stone, squat, a lamp burning inside, visible from the trees as a warm square against the darkening evening. Smoke from the chimney. Aldric stopped 40 meters out, in the shadow of the beeches, listened. Wren's footsteps on the path behind him, measured, steady, not hesitating. Good. He scanned the perimeter. And there they were, 2 men in the tree line on the north side, standing, trying not to be visible, doing a reasonable approximation of it for men who hadn't been trained in stillness. But Aldric had been doing this for 3 centuries. He saw them before he finished scanning, so 2 additional men. Not Cole's regular associates, different builds, different posture. Hired. From further away, probably. From a village far enough removed that they wouldn't be recognized and could disappear without local notice. And the weapons, even at 40 meters in fading light. He could see the sheen on the blades. Something coating them, something that caught light differently than plain steel. Silver. Cole knew he was a vampire. Of course he did. Everyone in Duskmere had known Lord Vane was a vampire for 3 centuries. And Cole Harwick was not, whatever else he was, stupid. He had prepared. Aldrich stood still for a moment, then smiled. Very small, very cold. Silver would slow him. A deep enough wound with enough silver. Yes, that would complicate the next few minutes in ways his planning was designed to prevent. But here was what Cole Harwick had not accounted for. Aldrich had walked through actual wars. He moved 4 minutes, no drama, no theater. Just precision, the specific efficiency of someone who understood exactly where pressure needed to go, and exactly how much of it to use. The first went down before he registered movement. The second had just enough time to see something that his nervous system processed as fundamentally wrong. Not a threat exactly, not a person approaching, just something that should not exist in the category of things he knew how to respond to. Before Aldric was already past that moment, both alive, both conscious, technically, neither going anywhere, neither making as. 4 minutes, then back to the dry line. Wren was at the door. She knocked 3 times, her knock, the one that said, "It's me, I came," as requested. The door opened. Cole Harwick, 28, broad in the way of mill work and years of physical labor. He stood in the doorway with the lamp behind him, and looked at Wren with the specific expression of a man taking inventory. Not greeting. Assessing. "You're late," he said. "I know. I'm sorry." He stood aside. She went in. The door closed. Aldric moved to the east wall. Old stone, old mortar, gaps in the chinking where the building had settled across decades. He found one. Positioned himself, close enough to hear clearly, close enough to see by the lamp's amber flicker. Wren in the center of the room. Arms loose. The careful blankness she put on like armor when she walked toward things she didn't want to be walking toward. Cole at the table. The knife was there, exactly as she'd said. Just lying on the wood, not threatening, just present. Reminding the room, sit. She sat. He drank. Didn't offer. The offering was a performance, and tonight he wasn't performing. He was watching. Her, you seem different, he said, tired. Long day, different isn't tired. He set the glass down. Different is something else. Silence. He stood, moved around the table slowly. The way certain animals move when they're not yet committed. Reading, still calculating. He stopped in front of her. Stand up. She stood. He looked at her from collar to hem, the practiced sweep of someone conducting an inspection. Then his eyes stopped at her throat. The faint outline of something under the fabric. He reached out, pulled the chain. The pendant came free. He held it up in the lamplight and turned it slowly. The Vane crest caught the flame and threw it back unmistakably. The cottage went very quiet. He looked at the pendant for a long time. Then looked at Wren. Where did you get this? Not a question. It was never a question with him. Always the shape of a question, closing down around something. It's mine. Where did you get this? She didn't answer, which was its own answer. Something moved through his face. Not rage yet. Something underneath it. Colder. The expression of a man who has been proven right about something he suspected and is not pleased about it. Because being right means the situation as more complicated than he wanted. He set the pendant on the table, next to the knife. He gave it to you, nothing. Why would a vampire lord give you his family crest, not loud, quieter than loud, which was worse? Has he been watching you? Has someone from that house been watching you? It's not, tell me the truth. His hand shot out. Grip on her wrist. The marked wrist. His fingers finding the exact place they'd found before. Tell me right now. She flinched, pulled. His grip tightened. The door came off its hinges, not with a creak, not with a groan of old wood giving in, just gone. Present and then on the floor inside the room, and the lamp flame bent sideways from the displaced air, and Aldric was standing in the empty frame. Cole released her wrist, stepped back extinct. Not fear, not yet. Just the body's automatic response to sudden spatial change. Aldric stood in the doorway. He looked at Cole first, then at Wren. She was standing. Rubbing her wrist was complicated, not relief exactly, not fear exactly. Something that held both of them, and also something older than either. The expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing to arrive, and is discovering that the arrival is, in its strange way, steadier than the waiting. Wren, he said, her name. Nothing else, but it said, are you all right? I see you. Move to the side. She moved to the side. Aldric looked at Cole Harwick, 28 years old. The most dangerous thing in every room he'd ever entered, by his own assessment, and the collaborative agreement of everyone who hadn't challenged it. He was looking at Aldric now, with the expression of someone recalibrating. You came to my house, Cole said. I did. You have no right. I have every right. Aldric stepped inside. The room changed quality with him in it, not because of size, but because of weight. The weight of something that had existed long enough to stop managing its own existence around other people's comfort. You've hurt someone who lives under my roof, who walks on my land. That makes this my concern. Cole looked at him for a long moment, then he smiled. Which was worse than if he'd gone for the knife, because the smile was not the smile of a man who was afraid. It was the smile of a man who had planned for this, and believed the plan was sufficient. I was wondering when you'd come, Cole said. Cole talked. This was Aldric registered, what Cole did when he was cornered. Not fight, not beg, talk. Because for a man like Cole, talking was fighting. Every sentence a probe, every pause a recalibration. Looking for the specific thing that would shift the ground beneath you. She's not yours, Cole said. She's a girl you hired to clean your floors. You can find another one tomorrow. I'm aware of what this situation looks like conventionally, Aldric said. Then you know this is none of your business. I know what you think this is. Aldric moved further into the room, unhurried. I disagree. Cole's eyes tracked him, the knife on the table between them. Everyone aware of it, everyone pretending they weren't. Here's what happens next, Cole said. You threaten me. I agree to leave her alone. You go back up your hill feeling like you've done something, and tomorrow I'm here, and she's here, and the only difference is she has a harder time of it because I don't respond well to interference. You believe that because it's been true. Every system that was supposed to stop men like me hasn't stopped men like me. It's just made paperwork. You're not wrong about the systems. Aldrich stopped moving, stood still. You're wrong about me. Cole held his position for a moment, then shifted. The smile changed, became something harder, more targeted. Let me tell you what I know about you, he said. Lord of the Manor. Ancient obligations. Protector of his domain, he tilted his head. Nora Ashby came to your gate. The air in the cottage changed. 2 years ago. March. She walked up your hill and stood at your gate and was turned away. Cole watched Aldrich's face, looking for the thing he knew was there. She didn't come for herself. She came to warn you, to ask for help. And your gatekeeper sent her home. Aldrich said nothing. So, Cole spread his hands, a gesture of presentation. Look at what I've laid out. What exactly is the difference between you and me? We both had the chance. We both didn't take it. The difference is, I don't perform nobility about it. The lamp flame moved in a draft from the broken doorway. And Aldrich was quiet, not because he had no answer. Because the answer wasn't simple, and he was not going to give Cole a simple answer. He wasn't going to give Cole anything. But the question had landed. It was designed to land. It had been aimed precisely, and it had hit precisely, and the fact that it was a weapon didn't make it untrue. He had been 200 meters from the gate. He lived with that. He was going to live with that. But here was the other thing. A man who asks, "How are you different from me?" is a man who always the answer, and hopes you don't. A man who genuinely couldn't see the difference, wouldn't bother asking. The question was the tell. Cole Harrick knew exactly what the difference was. He just needed it to stay unsaid. And then Wren moved. She had been against the wall. The side Aldrich had placed her, with a single look when he entered. She had been very still, the stillness of someone watching and processing and coming to a conclusion. Now, she's crossed the room. Stood in the center of it, between them, which was not the position of someone trying to stay out of it. And she looked at Cole, the man who had held her wrist like something he owned, the man who had put his initial on her skin like a signature on a deed, the man who had been in the periphery of every waking hour for 2 years. She looked at him without performance, without anger, or at least not only anger, with the specific, clear gaze of someone who has decided something. Nora Ashby deserved to live, she said. I deserve to live. Nothing you say changes that. Cole stared. Then she turned to Aldrich. Go ahead, she said. 2 words. The most complete sentence in the room. Something in Aldrich, the part Cole's words had reached, the specific place Cole had been aiming at, settled back into its correct position. Like a door closed against a draft, he nodded once. Go outside, he said. Sutton's people are in the clearing east of the tree line. Stay with them. She picked up the pendant from the table, fastened it back around her neck, looked at Cole one last time. Not triumph, not hatred. Just the expression of someone completing something that needed completing, and walked out through the empty doorway. Cole watched her go, turned back to Aldrich. You're going to kill me, he said. No. The first flicker of something in Cole's eyes that wasn't calculation. Then what? Aldrich looked at him steadily. Something harder than that, he said. For you specifically. The old oak had stood for 500 years. It had been there before the manor, before the village, before most of the landscape features that people now took for permanent. It stood in a clearing just inside the eastern tree line, massive, gnarled, absolute. The kind of tree that at some point in its 3rd or 4th century stopped being a tree and became a presence, a reference point. A thing you oriented around rather than past. A witness. Aldrich brought Cole to it the way you bring someone to a significant place. Not dragging, not restraining. Cole walked, because Cole had assessed his options and understood that the ones he believed he had were no longer on the table. The two hired men were somewhere behind them. Not mobile. At the base of the oak, 4 men, on their knees, Cole's 4 regular associates, not forcibly kneeling. The alternative had been made sufficiently clear, and this position had seemed preferable. They looked at Cole when he came into the clearing, with the expressions of men who had just discovered that the invulnerability they had operated under for years was not structural in the way they had assumed. Wren was there, near Sutton. Away from the men, Cole looked at his 4 men. Then at Wren, then at Aldric. "You can't do this," he said. Aldric looked at him with the patience of someone who had heard that sentence in many languages across many centuries and had long since stopped finding it particularly interesting. "I can," he said. "I am. What are you going to do to us?" And Aldrich said, and this was the part none of them had prepared for, the part that frightened them more than any display of force, "I'm going to say their names." He stood before them and said the names, all of them, Nora Ashby, who had walked to the gate of this manor and been turned away and been found in the river 9 days later, whose last written words were, "I tried." I hope someone listens. Wren, who had spent 2 years with Cole's initial carved into her wrist and his threats arranged around her sister like walls. She couldn't see past 3 other women, their actual names. Not the complainants, not the women who filed, their names. The names their parents gave them. The names on the formal complaints that were received and filed and left to go cold in administrative silence said out loud. In the clearing, under the 500-year-old oak, nobody moved, all 6 men. Cole and his 4 and the 2 hired men, who had come with silver-treated blades, and had woken up in a clearing with their options comprehensively reduced. 6 men, and for the first time in possibly a very long time, they were in a room, a clearing, under stars, where the names of the people they had hurt were being said aloud and had to be heard. Nobody spoke. Aldric reached into the place he kept carefully managed. The deep old part of his nature that he had spent 3 centuries keeping behind a dial door, that only opened when there was purpose and limit, and both were clearly established. Tonight there was purpose. Tonight there was limit. He opened the door. Precisely, not all the way, just enough. The marks came the way truth comes in a reckoning, not imposed but revealed, slow, undeniable, the exact shape they had always been. On Cole Harwick's forehead, in letters that looked burned rather than written, in a script with no decoration in it at all, Nora Ashby. And beneath, smaller, the same permanence, I ended her life. Cole made a sound he had probably never made before. Not a scream. The thing underneath a scream. The sound of something that has been private, being made public in a way that cannot be undone. The others received their marks, each specific, each earned. The names of who they had hurt, the description of what they had done. Not editorial, not punitive in its language. Just the plain fact of the plain truth written in a way that would not wash out and could not be covered completely. Complice to murder. Conspiracy of silent coward. In surface of violence. It took time. It was supposed to take time. When it was done, 6 men were at the base of the oak in various states of having been undone. 2 shaking, 1 crying, not performed crying. The involuntary kind. The kind your body does when the magnitude of a moment exceeds your defense's capacity. Cole was not crying. He was looking at Aldric, with something Aldric had not expected, not defiance, not calculation. Something more tired than either. The look of a man who has been outrunning something for a long time and has finally stopped and turned around and found it exactly where he knew it would be. Aldric looked back. "You'll live," he said. Even. The voice not of someone who has just done something difficult, but of someone completing a long overdue transaction. All of you. But you'll carry what you've done on your skin for the rest of your lives. Every person you meet will see it before they see anything else." He paused. "That is not cruelty. That is consequence. I'd suggest you spend whatever years you have left learning the distinction. He looked at each of them in turn. And if any of you, threatens any person, touches any person, follows any person, I will know before the night is over. A pause. And I will not be this patient when I come back. Go, they went. Not running. They didn't have running left in them. They walked, stumbled. Into the dark, away from the oak, away from the clearing. Cole last. He did not look back. Aldric watched until the dark took them, then stood in the clearing's quiet for a moment. The oak moved slightly above him in a night breeze. The slow, broad movement of something very old and very patient. Not alarmed, just present. He turned, Sutton at the edge of the clearing, expression neutral. But his eyes said something they rarely said, "Well done, my lord," and Bissett Sutton. Wren, he could not read her expression completely. It was the most complex thing her face had done in all the time he had known her, which was short but felt, tonight, like it contained more than its weeks. Something in it he recognized from the inside, the specific texture of relief and grief and finality that arrives when something overdue finally happens. Not happiness, not celebration, something quieter. More durable than either. Sutton cleared his throat. My lord. There's something should Theustes bullshit. Aldrich took it. Opened it. Read it. Read it again. Sutton's handwriting, copied quickly from an original found in the cottage. A letter, signed by. The contents were Greer. The contents were brief. The meaning was not. Greer had known about Nora Ashby. Not suspected. Known. Had been present for conversations in which the nature of her death was discussed in terms that made the official accident ruling exactly what it was. He had received compensation for the closed file. 8 days ago, he had been informed that Lord Vane was making inquiries and had taken steps. Aldrich folded the paper, put it in his coat, looked up at the oak. Greer, he said. Yes, said Sutton, tomorrow morning, before the council meets. Bring him to me, yes, my lord. And Fenwick, already in the gatehouse. Under watch, Aldrich nodded, then looked at Wren, who was still looking at him. Hand at her collar where the pendant was. Not holding it. Just aware of it. You should sleep, he said. I know. She didn't move. Is it finished? What's left? He looked toward the village. The lights in the valley, ordinary. Scattered. The unremarkable evidence of lives being lived in a place he had not been adequately protecting. The part where the structure that allowed this is made to answer for it, he said. Will it work? Some of it. Enough. She nodded slowly. Then she put her hand out. Not reaching for him. Not asking for anything. Just extending it. The way you extend something towards someone coming in from a long way out. An anchor. A simple gesture. He looked at it, then put his hand in hers. Cold to warm. Old to young. 3 centuries of choosing to protect something that should have been simple all along. They stood there for a moment. Under the oak that had stood for 500 years. Which had seen worse. Which would see more. Then they walked back up the hill. There is always a morning after. That's what nobody prepares you for. The dramatic moments have their own momentum. You move, because the situation moves you. Because there's a door to break, a name to say, a mark to make. The momentum carries you. And then the sun comes up. And the world is still there. Requiring things. Aldrich was his desk before 6. The financial reports were still on the desk from 2 days ago. The fence dispute. The letters. The ordinary machinery of an estate that had been running for 6 centuries and had no particular interest in pausing for the personal. He ignored all of it. Sat with the folded letter from Magistrate Greer in the center of the desk and looked at it. Not because he needed to read it again. He had it memorized. But because it was evidence of a thing he was about to address. And addressing it required sitting with the full weight of what it represented first. The letter was not the problem. The letter was a tool. The problem was the question Cole had put in the room the previous night. How are you different from me? And the problem was not that he didn't have an answer. He had an answer, several. They were accurate. They held up under examination. The problem was that having an accurate answer wasn't the same as being done with the question. The question required ongoing examination. It required you to sit with it rather than file it. Because the day you stopped sitting with it, the day it became a settled matter rather than a live one, was the day the comparison it proposed became valid. He knew this. He had known this for a very long time. Sutton knocked at 7. Greer is here. Aldrich stood, straightened his jacket, looked at the letter one more time. Send him in. Magistrate Greer was a compact man, mid-50s, gray at the temples. The bearing of someone who had spent decades in rooms where authority was performed and had become, through repetition, very skilled at the performance. He came in and stopped when he saw the desk, the letter. His own handwriting. Aldrich watched him process it. The rapid internal recalibration of available options. The micro-adjustments of someone deciding how to navigate a room he didn't control. Aldrich let him finish, then gestured to the chair. Greer sat, clasped his hands, maintained the professional composure that was doing quite a lot of structural work at the moment. You know why you're here, Aldrich said. I've heard some things about last night. You know why you're here. A pause. Something behind the composure shifted. I'd like to understand what you believe you've. Aldrich slid the letter across the desk. Greer looked at it, his handwriting looking back at him from a context he hadn't chosen. He looked at it the way you look at something that is out of your possession and has come back into situations you don't control. That was a private. It was found in the home of a man who used it to obstruct justice for 2 years. Aldrich's voice was level, not cold exactly, just flat. The flatness of someone who had moved past anger into something more durable. Nora Ashby is dead. You knew the circumstances. You closed the file. You were compensated to do so. Greer's jaw tightened. That is a serious accusation. It is an accurate one. The investigation was incomplete by design. A pause. Don't quiet. The word was very quiet, but it stopped Greer mid-sentence, the way a wall stops forward motion. Don't begin this with the performance. Don't sit in this room with that letter on the table between us and tell me the investigation was thorough. Greer was quiet for a moment. Then, in a register that was less composed and more tired. What do you want? Your resignation, this morning. Before the council convenes, Aldrich folded his hands on the desk. Signed, effective immediately. Greer calculated, and if I don't, then I bring this letter and Sutton's full documentation to the council meeting, and we have a different kind of conversation. In public, a long silence, the fire burning low, morning light starting through the tall windows. That specific gray hour before full day where everything is visible, but nothing is quite resolved. Greer unclenched his hands, reclasped them. Fine, he said, quietly. Not submission, the specific tone of someone choosing the least bad available option. I'll sign. He took the paper Aldrich slid across. Took the pen. But before he signed, he looked up. The armor had come off. He was just a man at the end of something, being honest in the particular way people get honest when all the managed versions are no longer available. You think you're different from me, he said. Same question. Different mouth. Different morning. Aldrich looked at him. You used fear to get this signature, Greer said. You used power to put me in a room I couldn't leave and make me choose between bad options. You might call it justice, but the mechanism is identical. A pause. We are not as different as you believe. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. Then, I used leverage to remove a corrupt official from a position where he was causing harm. You used money to bury a murdered woman's case. A pause. I agonize over the distinction. You're in this room trying to convince me there isn't one. A beat. That is the difference. Greer looked at him, then down at the paper, signed it, set the pen down. Are we finished? He said. We're finished. He stood, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. The girl, he said. Without turning, the one Harwick had. She'll be all right? Aldrich studied the back of his head, the gray at his temples. The posture of a man asking he has no right to know us, but to ask alms anyway. because some remnant of something, conscience or its ghost, requires the asking. Yes, Aldric said. Greer nodded once and left. Aldric sat alone in the study for a moment after the door closed, then picked up his coffee, set it down again, and went to face the council. The council meeting was at 10, 7 members. The chamber in the town hall, low ceilings, dark wood, the atmosphere of a room that had been the site of small administrative power for a long time, and was comfortable with that. Aldric arrived at 5 past the hour, deliberate. You let them settle first. Let them establish themselves in the room before you altered its geometry. They had heard about the previous night. Of course they had. Villages hear everything. And the version that had circulated had probably added 3 feet to his height, and a biblical quality to the light effects. He had learned to live with this. When he walked in, the reactions distributed themselves as expected. 2, openly hostile, institutional rather than personal, the hostility of people whose category of authority was being questioned. 2, cautious, watching. 2, calculating which direction the weight was falling and not yet committed. And Councilwoman Finch, 60-something. Sharp eyes behind practical spectacles. The bearing of someone who has spent decades being the most competent person in rooms that didn't fully credit it and had developed, as a result of this sustained experience, a tolerance for irony that bordered on philosophical peace. She was sitting at the far end of the table with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this exact meeting for quite some time. Aldric sat. The hostile ones began. Overreach, that was their word. Overreach of authority. Private citizens, ancient precedents that no longer applied. The legitimate role of governance extrajudicial. He let them talk. This was something he had learned across 3 centuries of rooms like this one. Let the objection be fully stated. Let it be in the air. Because cutting it off simply moved it to places where it could grow without response. The objection needed to land before it could be answered. He waited until the room had exhausted its first wave. Then, he placed 3 things on the table. First, a legal document, 14 pages. Sutton had found it in the Manor's archive, a precedent so specific and so old that it was almost insulting in its direct applicability. It outlined, in precise 16th century language, the rights and responsibilities of a titled lord, in cases where local governance had demonstrably failed in its duty of protection toward those within the lord's domain. Second, Greer's resignation. Signed. Already effective. Third, a 1-page proposal, not a demand, not a mandate. A proposal for a formal advocate position, funded by the Manor, structurally independent of the council, specifically empowered to receive and investigate complaints from vulnerable parties and ensure they did not get buried, withdrawn under duress, or filed into silence. He set them on the table in that order. Let the room look at them. And then Councilwoman Finch spoke. We failed, she said, into the silence, while the hostile ones were still composing their next objection. We failed. She said it the way you say something you've been waiting to say for years and have finally found the appropriate moment for. Not with drama, but with precision. 3. 1 suspicious death. Years of documented pattern. We had all of it, and we did nothing adequate. She looked at the men on either side of her. Lord Vane did not overstep. We understepped. That is what this meeting should be about. The room went quiet. The hostile ones looked at her, then at each other, then at the documents, and one by one in the way rooms shift when the most accurate person in them says the most accurate thing, the resistance reorganized itself. Not into agreement. Politics was rarely that clean. Into something workable. Into the shape of people who understood that the story had already been written, and their remaining choice was which part of it they wanted to occupy. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When it ended, the advocate position existed. The legal precedents were formally acknowledged. Greer's replacement would be selected through a new process that included community participation. Not perfect, nothing was, but structural. The kind of change that outlasted the moment that created it. Aldric walked out of the town hall into the July morning and stood on the front step. Sutton was waiting at the bottom. "Well," Sutton said, "workable." Aldrich said, "Better than you expected." "Slightly." Sutton permitted himself approximately 1/4 of a smile. On Sutton, this was functionally equivalent to a standing ovation. They walked back up the hill. The question didn't leave. That was what he needed to acknowledge alone in the library that evening. With the fire burning low and Sutton occupied elsewhere, and the house in the specific quiet of a place where something significant has happened, and the aftermath is still settling. The question didn't leave because he'd answered it to Greer. Didn't leave because the answer was correct, and he knew it. Didn't leave because the morning had gone well, and the council had agreed. And the day had moved forward as days were supposed to. It stayed, because it was supposed to stay. He sat in the reading chair by the window. Not the desk, the chair. The one where people sat when they were just sitting, without an agenda. He thought about Cole. Not the previous night, the years before it. The specific intelligence required to do what Cole had done. Not impulse, not simple cruelty, but sustained, premeditated architecture. Identifying targets. Finding the specific leverage that would hold each one in place. Using a 15-year-old girl as a wall around her sister. Using a network of 4 men to close off the roads. That required thought. Deliberate, sustained thought. A man who is simply cruel commits violence. A man like Cole builds it, and a man like Aldric. Stop. That comparison didn't hold. He knew that. Had always known that. But the question had been asked twice in the same day, by different men, from different directions. And the fact that he had answered it correctly, with distinctions that were real and held up, didn't mean the asking was without value. The asking was a mirror. And mirrors, even the ones you'd prefer not to look into at length, showed you something true. He had been at his desk, 200 meters from the gate, and Nora Ashby had been turned away. He had been managing the estate, reports, disputes, the ordinary machinery, and someone had come to his gate specifically to warn him about something happening on his land, and had been sent home by a keeper who, as it turned out, not operating in his interest. That was not simple negligence, but it was something. He had pulled back, from the village, from the people in it. He had managed from distance, because distance felt clean. Because proximate attention felt like entanglement. Because at some point in his 3rd century, he had decided that entanglement was optional and had acted accordingly. Nora Ashby had walked toward September. She had a classroom waiting for her. Students, geography maps, the specific teaching moment where understanding where things are helps you understand why they are. She had walked toward all of that, and she hadn't arrived. He sat with that. He was supposed to sit with that. Not to perform it, not to punish himself with it. But because the alternative, filing it away as resolved, was exactly the kind of detachment that had created the condition in the first place. He was 320 years old. He had time to sit with things. After a while, the weight shifted. Still there, but something you could carry rather than something that was carrying you. He reached for a book. Not the property law volume. Something else. A history of a different kind. One with people in it. He opened it. Started reading. That was enough for that evening. 3 days after the council meeting, they came, the 3 women, not together. Separately on separate mornings, each one making the walk up the hill under her own steam, each one arriving at the Manor gate with the particular bearing of someone who has made a decision and is moving before the decision can reverse. The first was in her late 20s. She came with a letter she had written and rewritten several times, which she gave to Aldric with both hands, the way you give someone something that is both important and dangerous. He read it in front of her, slowly. "All of it, thank you," he said. She looked at the window. "I wanted to file another one after I withdrew the first. I thought maybe if enough of us tried again. But we kept withdrawing, and I kept thinking, if I had just been braver, If we had held together, you were protecting yourselves, Aldric said. We were afraid, yes, and afraid people protect themselves. That is not a failure of character. That is how fear functions. He paused. The system that made your fear a workable strategy for Cole Harwick to rely on. That is where the failure lives. Not with you. She looked at him for a long time, then said quietly, he's walked around with his face. I saw him at the market this morning. A pause. He was just standing there, and everyone saw it, and nobody stopped walking. Nobody spoke to him. He was just there, in his own life, and it was already different. She looked at the window. I thought I'd feel more than I did. I felt a little sad, actually, and then I didn't. Aldrich said nothing, because sometimes the only appropriate response to a complicated true thing was to let it be what it was. She left. The second woman came the following day. Older. Harder in the way of someone who had decided softness was a liability and had been proven right often enough to maintain the position. She sat across from him and said, before he could speak, I don't want gratitude, and I don't need to discuss what happened to me. I want to know if the advocate position is going to function or if it's going to be another document that says the correct things. It depends significantly on who is hired for it, Aldrich said. Who are the candidates? He told her. 2 names. Background. Approach. Assessment. She listened. Asked 2 questions that revealed she had thought about Tabas more carefully than the questions suggested. Then, the second one. She has a spine. The first will fold under pressure. I'll take that into account. Don't take it into account. Do it. A pause. With respect. Noted. She left. Aldrich sat for a moment after she was gone, made a note. Appointed the second candidate. The third woman came on the third morning, barely 20. She came in and sat down and put her hands in her lap and was quiet for a long moment. Just present, in the way of someone who has decided to be somewhere and is being there. Aldrich waited. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. I know you probably hear that often, and it doesn't. It means something, he said. She looked at him. Every time, he said. Don't apologize for saying it. She looked at him for a moment longer, then nodded, and left. He sat in the quiet after she was gone. 3 women. 3 mornings. 3 versions of the same long story and what it left in a person, not closed. Not resolved. Not the kind of thing that closed and resolved, but spoken, witnessed, placed in a room where someone with authority had heard it and not looked away, which was different from nothing, which was, in fact, almost everything. The parents of Nora Ashby came on a Friday morning. Sutton had mentioned it in the briefing. Matter of fact, the way Sutton mentioned everything. The Ashbys requested an audience. I've put them at 11. Aldrich had spent the hour before 11. Not working, just sitting. He knew what to do for the 3 women, roughly. He knew how to receive them, what they needed. Acknowledgement. Witness. The specific experience of someone in authority taking them seriously, without requiring them to perform their suffering for it. But the Ashbys. He had turned their daughter away, not intentionally, not knowingly, not with any understanding of who she was, or what she had come to say, or what 9 days later would mean. He had been 200 meters away, and a gatekeeper had made a decision, and the decision had set a sequence in motion that ended in a river. None of that changed the gate. None of that changed the keeper. None of that changed whose gate and whose keeper they were. They arrived at 11. Exactly. The punctuality of people who were raised to believe arriving when expected was a form of respect, and who had extended that courtesy even here, even now. He met them at the door himself. The door. Not the sitting room, not the study. The door. Because the door was where she had been stopped, and it seemed right to begin there. They were older than he had imagined. Her mother was small, white-haired. Her father taller, but carrying himself in the bent way of a man whose grief had changed the architecture of how he held his body. Not frailty. Weight. Specific, ungeneralizable weight. He brought them to the warm sitting room. The one with the fire and the comfortable chairs and the view of the garden. the one that felt like a house rather than an institution. He offered tea. They accepted. They sat with the tea and didn't drink it, in the particular way of people who have accepted an offering because refusing felt wrong, but have no actual capacity for it. Nora's father spoke first. He was a precise man with language. You could hear the care in his word choices, the deliberateness of someone who understood that language could compound hurt if used carelessly and had decided against carelessness. He said they'd heard about what happened, about Cole Harwick, about the marks, about the council and the changes being made. He said they were glad, not grateful. Glad. Aldric noted the distinction, not receiving a gift, recognizing a correct outcome. Then he reached into his coat, took out a piece of paper. Small, the folds soft at the edges, handled many times. He placed it on the table between them. That's the last thing she wrote, he said. Not to us. We don't know to whom. Possibly to herself. He looked at it on the table. We found it after. In her room, Aldric looked at it. Didn't reach for it. She wrote, I tried. I hope someone listens. A pause. The father's voice was very steady, the steadiness of someone who had said these words to himself many times before and had learned to hold them without breaking. We want to put that on her stone. Not the dates, not the standard language, those words. Her words. He looked at Aldric directly. Can you help us do that? 320 years old. Had sat in rooms with people who held historical weight in real time. Had been present for things that became events in accounts, written by people who hadn't been there. This man was not enormous by those measures. He was a father. He had a small piece of paper his daughter had written before she died. He wanted her words on stone. Yes, Aldric said. The father nodded. Nora's mother, who had not spoken yet, put her teacup on the table very carefully, like placing something important. Then she looked at Aldric and said she was going to be a teacher. She had already been accepted to start in September. A pause. That September. The September of the year she died, her voice didn't break. It was doing very specific work, the work of making something that had been lost into something that had existed. Making Nora real and particular, and present in a room where she was not. She liked geography. She used to say that understanding where things are helps you understand why they are. Aldric sat very still. She sounds like someone I would have wanted to meet, he said. Nora's mother looked at him for a long moment, then said, she would have liked you. She liked complicated things. He didn't know what to say. He sat with it the way you sit with this, something too precise for a response, too delicate for grip. They stayed 40 minutes. When they left, he walked them to the door. The same door. The father stopped on the step. Turn back, you couldn't have known, he said. Not absolution, an accurate observation. But now you do. So, Aldric agreed. The father nodded. They walked down the hill. Aldric stood in the doorway and watched them go until the path curved, and the trees took them. Then he went inside, to his study. Sat at the desk, didn't reach for the coffee. Pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. Not reports, not correspondence, a policy document. For the manor, for the gates. For the process by which anyone who came to this gate and asked for help would be handled going forward. He wrote it in plain language, not legal language. The kind any person could read and understand without specialized knowledge. He began it. Those under this roof's protection are to be known by name. Wren found Cole at the market on a Thursday morning. She hadn't gone looking for him. She had gone to the village for the first time since the night at the Oak. Not sent, not accompanied. Just walking down the hill on her own because it was time, and she needed to know she could. Needed to discover what it felt like. Walking down a hill she had always been free to walk down, but walking down it differently. The market was busy. July morning commerce. Vegetables, bread, the ordinary exchange of a working week. She was looking at apples when the quality of the noise changed. Not louder, the opposite. A specific kind of quiet that moves through a crowd when something has entered it that nobody wants to address directly. The social hush of collective avoidance. She looked up. Cole Harwick was standing at the edge of the market, not shopping, not moving. Just there, in the way someone is there when they have nowhere particular to be welcomed, and no particular path forward doesn't require walking past people who are looking away his face. She had known the marks were there, had known since the night in the clearing, but knowing and seeing were different. Knowing was a fact held in your mind. Seeing was a Thursday morning in July with sunlight and bread smells, and people moving carefully around a man they didn't want to be near. Nora Ashby, legible from 15 meters, clear in the morning light, and beneath it. The smaller letters, she didn't read them. She had already read them. She had been there. She stood with the apple in her hand and looked at him, waited for the thing she'd expected. The release. The specific satisfaction of accumulated fear and anger and waiting, finally finding an outlet. She had earned that feeling. It was owed. It didn't come. Not the way she had imagined. What came instead was quieter. The feeling of setting something down that had been part of your weight for so long, you'd stopped registering it separately from yourself. Not triumph, not celebration. Just the plain, unglamorous relief of a burden removed. Her hands were not shaking. Her wrist, where the mark was, his initial, cut into her skin, didn't ache the way it sometimes did when her body was carrying tension. It couldn't process any other way. She put the apple back, turned, walked back through the market in the direction she had come. She did not look back. This was new. 2 years of always looking back. 2 years of the space between her shoulder blades permanently braced against something coming from behind. And now, nothing. Just the morning. Just the road going up the hill. Just her own footsteps on ground she was choosing to walk on. She went back to the manor, upstairs, east wing corridor, the room at the end. She knocked. Petra opened it with the disheveled energy of someone, deep in the middle of something. Book in one hand, ink on her fingers from the notes she'd been writing in the margins, which was apparently a habit she had developed during her time in the Manor library and showed no signs of abandoning. "You're back," Petra said. "I'm back." Petra looked at her the way sisters look at each other when they're assessing something specific without wanting to ask directly. "How was the village?" "Fine," Wren said, and it was true. It was simple. And simplicity, after 2 years of extraordinary complexity, felt like something she had forgotten was available. She came and sat on the edge of Petra's bed. Petra settled back into her chair. The room was warm, the window open. Outside, the July afternoon was doing what July afternoons did, being unreasonably, almost personally pleasant, as if the weather had an opinion about how things had turned out. Petra said, "Can I stay? A bit longer?" Wren looked at her. "You like it here. I like the library." A pause. "And Lord Vane said I could use the geography reference volumes if I checked with Sutton first. I've found 4 books I've never seen anywhere else." Wren smiled. "Small, real, I'll ask." She said, "You don't need to ask for me." "I know." A pause. "I want to." She found him in the study that evening. The amber light doing what amber light did through those particular tall windows. The coffee on the desk, cold, untouched, as it had been every evening she'd come in to deliver the day's correspondence. She put the letters down. He set his pen aside. "How was the village?" He said, "Fine, fine." A pause. "I saw Cole. I know you had someone watching." Yes, she considered this, found with some surprise that she didn't mind. He was just standing there. "Yes, I waited for something." A feeling. She sat in the chair across from him. The same chair, the same proportions. Now familiar in a way that felt like something earned rather than simply accumulated. But it was mostly just ordinary. He was just a man standing in a market. That's all he ever was, Aldric said. She looked at him. Then why was he so? Because ordinary men who face no consequences can do extraordinary damage. The ordinariness is the point. It's what makes people say, "But he seems so normal," as if that were a contradiction. A pause. "It isn't." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you all right?" she asked. He looked up from the desk. The question seemed to have arrived from an unexpected direction, which told her it had been a while since anyone had asked it. Adequately, he said. That's not a real answer. No, he agreed. It's not. He looked at the window. The Amber Valley. I met with Nora Ashby's parents today. She said nothing. Waited. Her mother told me she was going to be a teacher. That she liked geography. He paused. She had been accepted to start in September. The room held very still. September of the year she died, he said. Wren looked at him. At the quality of the stillness that had settled over him. Not the controlled stillness of someone managing a performance, but something more unguarded. Something that had cost something to arrive at. That's not something you put down, she said. No, you carry it differently over time. Yes, a pause. That is all you can do. She looked at him for a moment. Then, Petra wants to stay. She's been annotating your geography volumes, which I apologize for in advance. Something moved in his expression. The ones in the second alcove, apparently. Those annotations are almost certainly an improvement. There was something in his voice that wasn't quite amusement, but occupied adjacent territory. Tell her she can stay as long as she's useful. The volumes in the north section are available to her without restriction. I'll tell her. She stood, started toward the door. Wren. She stopped. The mark, he said. Not a question. Just naming it. Acknowledging it the way you acknowledge something that deserves acknowledgement rather than avoidance. She turned back. Her hand moved to her wrist. Automatic. Then stilled. It's still there, she said. It doesn't mean what it did. It will fade, he said. Slowly. But it will, you sound certain. I've watched a great many things that seemed permanent become less so. A pause. The ones that truly last are the ones people choose to maintain. She looked at him. At the weight his expression carried from 320 years of watching things. All kinds of things run their course. Like a 500-year-old oak, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Like that, she stayed where she was. Hand on the doorframe. Looking at the room, the desk, the cold coffee, the reports, the amber light, the man who had sat at this desk for 3 centuries and clearly intended to continue sitting at it, regardless of what else happened. Thank you, she said, not for the large thing. For the smallest ones, a pause. For page 312. For meeting his parents at the door yourself. For the cold coffee every morning, she paused again. Like it proves you're still paying attention. He looked at the cup on his desk, then at her, and his expression did something that was not precisely emotional, and was, in fact, both of those things, and also something older and quieter than either of them. Good night, he said. Good night, she said, and she left. He sat alone in the study. The reports waited, the letters, the ordinary machinery of 6 centuries and counting. He picked up the policy document, the one that began, "Those under this roof's protection are to be known by name." He looked at it for a moment, then added one line. "And they are to be seen." Set the pen down, looked out the window at the dark valley below. The village lights, small and scattered and permanent people down there, with their names and their Septembers, and their annotated geography books, and their long sleeves in summer, slowly, at their own pace, beginning to roll up. He was going to know the names. He was going to see. That was the vow, the real one. Older than the paperwork, older than the law, and he had broken it once, by looking away, by managing from distance, by deciding that entanglement was optional when it was not optional at all. He was not going to break it again. Outside, the July night held the village in its ordinary dark. The lights small and scattered. People with their names and their lives and everything still ahead of them that deserved to stay that way. He was going to see them. All of them. That was the whole of the vow, and the whole of the work, and the whole of what it meant to have been here this long and still be choosing. Still choosing, every night.